And good day, ladies and gentlemen, or good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. And welcome to Splendid Isolation number 9. As usual, I'm going to play a bit of music to start with. And I thought this would be appropriate because on a few streams this week, I've been watching assorted Nazi laughers and Adolf fanboys going on about Dresden in one or two streams that I watched this week, so I thought this piece of music would be appropriate. And that was in memory of the over 55,000 RAF Bomber Command aircrew, many from Canada, Australia, New Zealand and South Africa, as well as from the UK, who lost their lives in World War II. So there we go. Okay, guys, so that was the beginning of that. And as I say, that was just a response to these bloody Nazi laughers who I see in chats all the time talking about the terrible war crime of Dresden, who never talk about the terrible war crimes of the London Blitz or Coventry or any of the other bombing campaigns that all the major powers did in World War II. So there we go. Adamant, how are you going, mate?
Yeah, good. You?
Yeah, very good, very good. I put a real life thumbnail up today of the Royal Navy sailor steam sloop HMS Gannet of 1878. She helped defend the Red Sea port of Suakin against the fanatical dervish Ansar, who were Islamist fanatics in the 1880s at the time of the Gordon Relief Expedition. And she also took part in a great many Royal Navy anti-slavery patrols in the Indian Ocean, the Gulf of Arabia and the Red Sea. And you can go and visit her at the historic port of Chatham in Kent. And she's well worth a visit. She's a really beautiful ship.
Yeah, I think I've actually seen her. I have been to Chatham Dockyard.
Did you go aboard?
No, I went aboard the submarine instead.
Yeah, there's a submarine, there's a destroyer, I believe, a World War II destroyer. I think she's the only surviving British World War II destroyer.
Yeah.
And also there is HMS Gannet. Now, I went aboard HMS Gannet like literally years and years and years ago. Like, she survived because she was a boys' naval school for a long time, moored on the Medway somewhere. And that's why she survived. And when I went aboard her, they'd gotten rid of all the kind of superstructure that they'd added over the years, like for classrooms and dormitories and all this kind of stuff. And she looked like a miniature aircraft carrier in wood and steel, because there was nothing on the deck. And if you look, the beautiful job they've done of restoring her is just amazing these days.
Yeah.
Like when I went aboard her, she was moored off of Gosport. So that was a very long time ago. It must have been, oof. I know I was on leave and I was back in the UK, so it was probably the 90s, I think. But anyway, it was a long time ago. So HMS Gannet, well worth a visit. She's one of only a couple of Victorian ships, Victorian Royal Navy ships that survive in the UK. The other one, of course, being the very famous HMS Warrior.
Yeah, what happened to the HMS Warrior? When was that?
Well, she was the world's first iron battleship in 1860. And she was basically an enlarged wooden frigate design, but in steel and with armor plate. And when she was launched in 1860, she made every other warship in the world obsolete because she could defeat every other warship in the world. Like just the number of her guns, her armor, which was impenetrable to most guns, and her speed. She was a very fast ship for her day. And she survived because she was used as an oil jetty by the Royal Navy for many, many years before they decided, like, she'd been turned into like a thing where the ship could go alongside and pick up fuel and so on. And she survived like that for like many, many years. And then they decided, well, okay, this is one of the world's great historic warships, so we had better restore her, which of course they now have, and she's in Portsmouth.
Right, yeah. I still need to go to Portsmouth actually. I've never been there.
Oh man, I had a guy turn around and tell me Portsmouth was horrible, and like obviously it's the home of the Royal Navy, but this chap had obviously never been to the home of the British Army, which is Aldershot, because Portsmouth is Shangri-La compared to Aldershot. Let me assure you. Portsmouth's actually quite a nice town relative to Aldershot. So Aldershot on a Saturday night, I would not recommend to people, to be honest. But yeah. Oh dear. So what have you been up to this week, Armin? Anything interesting?
No, actually, working, despairing at lots of different stuff. But beyond that, nothing much.
Okay, well, I've been reading Splendid Isolation, which is appropriate for the title of our stream, which is John Chalmers' book from 1999 that looks at British foreign policy, and particularly policy in relation to Europe between 1874 and 1914. And I've long held like the original sin of Great Britain and the Empire was joining World War I in 1914. And in particular in raising a mass land army against all British tradition. And I think that most of the bad things that have happened to Britain, and to some degree to Dominions as well, after that, were really related to that. I think Britain spent a great deal of her wealth. She certainly spent a great deal of her talent in terms of her young men. And also belief in herself in World War I. It was like there is no comparison between the wealth and power of Britain in 1913 and Britain in 1919. Even though the British Empire was slightly larger because of some German colonies that we'd captured and so on, Britain was like a much, much weaker power, relatively speaking, in 1919 than she had been in 1913. And I just think it's impossible to argue that Britain joining World War I in 1914 was a good idea. And I don't understand relatively sensible historians like Max Hastings, for example, who tried to say it was. But there we go.
Yeah. There was, oh God, what's his proxy name? How can I not remember this? The Prime Minister before Churchill. Chamberlain, yeah. Chamberlain spoke at a sort of separate time where he said that, like, following World War One, Britain's army had to transition from an actual military force just to being a police force because it couldn't sort of hold up sustained military action. And I think he even once said, kind of prophetically, that Britain could fight and beat Germany again, but it couldn't fight and beat Germany and Japan at the same time, which was a worry to him.
Yeah. I follow a couple of naval channels. Dr. Alexander Clark, for example, who is probably he is the best British naval historian, who is regularly on YouTube, and he's done a lot of stuff on British naval policy in the 1920s and the 1930s, for example. And the Royal Navy, because of the Washington Naval Treaty, which meant that the Anglo-Japanese naval alliance had to end because the Americans insisted it had to end. But of course, they didn't offer an alliance to replace it. They just insisted that the Royal Navy has to get rid of it because they were scared that the Royal Navy and the Japanese Navy together would inevitably be more powerful than they were. So the Anglo-Japanese naval alliance had to end, and so the Royal Navy in the 1920s fairly swiftly started planning for a naval war with Japan, because that was quite likely, and Japan was the most powerful nation that the UK was liable to fight if it wasn't the USA at sea. And of course, then you had Hitler, and then partly through British diplomatic errors, particularly on the part of politicians, Sir Anthony Eden forced Italy into Germany's camp, so that the Royal Navy in 1939 ended up with this nightmare scenario of having to fight a war in the Atlantic and the North Sea against Germany, a war in the Mediterranean against Italy, and a war in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific against the Japanese. And although the Royal Navy in 1939 was still just about the most powerful and largest navy in the world, no navy was big enough to fight wars in all three of those places. It's just impossible for one navy to be that strong. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I mean the naval treaty we cut with Japan, wasn't that considered a point of national embarrassment to the Japanese?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. You see, the thing was, there was going to be an arms race after World War One. Like in 1920, there was going to be an arms race, and it was going to be an arms race principally between America and Britain, and Japan secondarily. Like Germany's navy was basically finished because the Germans scuttled most of their ships at Scapa Flow after they'd surrendered to the Royal Navy in 1918. So Germany didn't really have a navy. France, by that stage, was far more bankrupt than the UK was, and certainly couldn't afford to keep a navy modern. Italy had a reasonable navy, but it was pretty much confined to the Mediterranean. And of course, in World War One, Italy was a British ally, as were the Japanese. So it was going to be a building race between Britain and America. And at that stage, people will tell you that Britain couldn't afford a building race. Well, she could have. She actually could have. Britain was nowhere near as bankrupt in 1919 as she was in 1945, not even approaching. So she could have afforded a building race with the US, and she actually designed some extremely impressive ships that were planning to be built. But the British government didn't want to do that. They weren't conservatives. They were liberals or Labour people who were in charge at the time. And so you ended up with the Washington Naval Treaty, which basically got rid of nearly everyone's older battleships and left them with about 15.
Yeah.
So the Royal Navy went from having... Yeah, and the Royal Navy went from having, by far the world's largest fleet of battleships to the same size as America in battleships, and only slightly bigger in cruisers and stuff. Probably Japan had 2/3 as many, something like 9, I believe, rather than 15, 8 or 9. And they were the only countries that really mattered in terms of navies in 1920, 21. And of course, everyone in those days was saying, oh, the League of Nations is going to end war and all the rest of it, which of course wasn't going to happen, particularly because whilst the vile American President Woodrow Wilson was instrumental in setting up the League of Nations, the Americans then refused to join it. So, there we go. And the League of Nations, for anyone who doesn't know, was kind of like the predecessor version of the United Nations, and probably even more useless if that's possible. But
yeah. So the Amerimut strikes again then.
Yeah, to some
Breaking
degree,
up
I
our-
suppose.
All this talk of no more brother wars.
Yeah, exactly. You get that quite constantly. But I mean, basically, America still had a plan to fight Britain at sea, which I think was Plan Red, if I remember correctly. I know Plan Orange was the war against Japan plan, and I think Plan Red was the one against the Royal Navy. And America kept that plan up to date right up until into the 1930s. And a basic plan was to try and defend the east coast of America against the Royal Navy, while at the same time trying to invade Canada, of course.
Yeah.
So, it was quite interesting. People say that there might have been an Anglo-American naval war in the 1920s, but for the Washington Treaty, I have my doubts about that personally, but there we go.
So
Britain was never very keen on the idea of fighting America, because how do you do it? You can't invade it. You can't invade America. It's too vast. So you can strangle it via blockade, and that might strangle its trade. But America again is so vast that that's not going to kill it either. So a war against America from a British point of view was really like about defending British trade and defending Canada, really. So there wasn't a lot to gain.
So outside of the social issues we have now, how much of an increase do you think something like the Navy would have to have in funding to really cement a path as maybe not top dog but a big dog again?
Well, Britain already has the strongest navy in Europe by a long way. We're considerably stronger than the French Navy, which is the next biggest, or the Italian Navy, which is the next biggest. And the Italian Navy tends to concentrate on the Mediterranean, obviously. But Britain already has the strongest navy in Western Europe, but that's not saying a great deal. I mean, the Royal Navy has a nominal 19 major surface escorts, which is to say destroyers and frigates. Now, in modern parlance, a destroyer is basically a ship which is mainly designed to protect against air threats, whereas a frigate is a ship that is mainly designed to protect against submarines. And they both can do anti-surface action against other surface ships, obviously. So Britain has a nominal 19, but it's really 17 that are active. It really needs, the Royal Navy needs at least 25 major surface escorts, frigates and destroyers. And the earliest that is possibly going to happen would be about 2030 at the rate we're going at the moment. We have a very good frigate that's been designed, the Type 26, but they're only going to build 8 of them, whereas the Royal Navy could really do 12. There's a secondary frigate, the Type 31, which they're planning on building 5 of. And there's now another one, which I think is the Type 32 or 33, I can't remember, I get confused with all these bloody numbers. They're planning on building maybe 3 or 4 of, I don't know, we'll have to see. But the Royal Navy needs to get up to 25 major surface escorts. The 2 carriers is fine. That means you've got 1 carrier pretty much always available, and 2 occasionally, in a very huge emergency, because manning her would be a problem at the same time as the other one. Britain needs a replacement for HMS Ocean, the helicopter carrier that we sold to Brazil. Personally, I'd like to see Albion and Bulwark eventually scrapped. Not now, obviously. They're amphibious warfare ships for landing the Royal Marines. I'd eventually like to see them scrapped, and I'd like to see them replaced with 2 helicopter carriers, maybe something like the Australian Canberra class, which could also operate F-35 jets in the same way that HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales can, although obviously not so many of them. So that would give you like more flight decks, if you see what I mean. Also, Britain today has 7 hunter-killer submarines, and quite honestly, she needs 10. Hunter-killer nuclear submarines are very powerful ships. They're ships like HMS Conqueror that sank the Belgrano in the Falklands War. They're extremely powerful ships. There's some things they can't do, quite a lot of things they can't do, but they are very powerful warships, and they are a huge threat to any other navy. Only a few navies have good hunter-killer nuclear submarines. The Royal Navy is one of them, but seven boats, I should say, is not enough. They need to have 10, in my opinion, but that's not going to happen. Not anytime soon, anyway.
So I saw someone in chat say something that we should probably touch on in a bit, but I was kind of wondering if you thought that Boris Johnson's planned military spending increase would do any good.
Yeah, I think it'll do a bit of good. I do, particularly as he seems to want to expand the Navy. I mean, given that Britain has now finally got some sort of Brexit, not an ideal one in my opinion, but some sort of Brexit, Britain is ever more increasingly going to have to depend on world trade. We can't feed ourselves. Haven't been able to feed ourselves for many, many, many decades. So Britain depends on world trade, and 98% of world trade goes in merchant ships. Only a very small minority of world trade goes in aircraft. So, if your Navy can't defend your ships, or like friendly ships bringing you supplies, including vital raw materials and food and all the rest of it, you just can't survive as an island nation like Britain. So, I think Boris Johnson's any increase in defence spending at the moment is good, because Britain isn't spending enough on defence. But it's not enough, but it will help, sure. How can the Navy help us in the coming race war, though? I don't know there is going to be a coming race war, but, we'll see.
Well, no, there won't be. But I do kind of wonder. I mean, this is something I've been thinking about for a while, and I don't know. I haven't really got the wherewithal to really follow this through. But we need to, as I see it, enlarge institutions that are home to our guys, and that includes that a large part of that is going to be the military.
Yeah, I think the military in Britain, in common with all Western nations, including Australia, is being increasingly feminized. There's ever increasing globo homo propaganda being spewed out to officers and soldiers and servicemen generally. So there's that, but still at base, the people who join the armed forces tend to be more based and more traditional, for certain.
Yeah, I mean it's a good kicking off point as well, because the thing is as well, like an institution will beget more of its own. So in the same way that the universities multiply their ideology through, literally bringing people in and funneling them through, the military can be much the same way, especially if you could do something like maybe not a full-scale one, but you could do something like a small-scale national service.
Yeah, we talked about this on the stream before. I mean, I think there is much to be said, not from the point of view of the armed forces, because the armed forces don't really want to spend all their time training guys only to have them leave when they're trained, which is what happens when you have national service. But from the point of view of the people who joined it, I think some form of military national service for boys would be a bloody good idea. So I certainly wouldn't be against kids having a year of that, and if they liked it, then of course they could make it a career. So I wouldn't be against that at all.
Yeah, I mean that's probably kind of something that's I don't know. It's a funny one, because sometimes you see like Labour and the institutions will put up a huge amount of fight against policies that on the surface seem quite innocuous, but they do kind of see the threat. They do see the threat behind having like a bigger military, for example. They see the threat behind the sort of patriotism that's born out of military parades, and that's why they hate them so much. When Trump talked about doing one, they hated it.
Yep, totally agree with that. I do. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. You've got to look at a lot of military traditions and so on. They're part of the history and the sense of the past that your nation has. That's one reason I'm a big supporter of military and naval traditions. They're part of the sense you need to understand what being a Briton is, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, they obviously want to get rid of them for that reason, you know? And like I'm subscribed to the Armed Forces channel on YouTube, and most of it's crap, frankly, because what they really want to push is like women in the military, which is like a oxymoron, really, and also obviously the LGBTQ and BAME and all that other nonsense, which actually makes your military less and less possible to be successful. You know, none of that stuff helps the military win. It doesn't. And then I'll watch someone like AA, you know, academic agent, and I'll see him saying, "Oh, yeah, but modern war, you're sitting behind a thing pushing buttons." Well, no, that's not what happens. Actually, you know, you still got to have guys on the ground. You've still got to have men manning warships and aircraft and all that kind of stuff. You know, yes, there's more automation. Yes, there's more AI and what have you. And yes, the missiles do get better, although missiles like invariably don't perform as well as people say they will, particularly the people trying to sell them. But you still need like guys on the ground with rifles and guys manning guns and missiles on warships and this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they had that line in that movie. I think it was Jarhead. I haven't watched the whole thing, but they talk about like they're saying, oh, like when the Air Force is coming through bombing everything before the soldiers even get there.
Yeah.
And they're saying, oh, eventually the wars will just be fought completely by like the Air Force. And it's like, well, no, because you do need that almost like a police force on the ground when everything's said and done.
Yeah, and it's not even that. It's like look what happened in Iraq and in Afghanistan, for example. You know, like the Air Forces all went crazy on both those places. And in the end, the Allies, particularly the Americans, but also the British secondarily, had to deploy thousands upon thousands of soldiers to fight all these bloody idiots. Now, I don't think we should have invaded Iraq at all. And I think we should have got out of Afghanistan much more quickly than we did. But that doesn't mean that you don't need an army in a war. You do. You know, if you look at fighting around the world, it's still mostly infantry, soldiers, and tanks and artillery and all the traditional stuff. It's like that isn't going to change any time within our lifetimes.
Yeah. So, like, here's another one actually. Still talking about the military. I don't know if you watched the most recent cigar stream, right?
The one earlier today. Or yesterday.
Yeah. I suppose it would be for you.
Yeah.
And they were talking about this Yoki guy, and there was a thing in there they said about how the sort of heroism of battle has sort of been lost now because artillery and the Air Force have just kind of killed those sorts of ideas off. Do you think that's true?
Well, we know it's not. I mean, we've talked about like heroes of World War One, for example, haven't we?
Yeah.
So no, it hasn't. Not totally. I mean, you know, war is not a glorious adventure. You know, anyone who thinks that is a fucking idiot. But there is still heroism in war. Yes, of course there is. Particularly, you know, when you're fighting for your mates on either side of it, which is basically what soldiers fight for in the main. So yeah, I agree. By the way, Nataman Prime, I agree totally that Britain isn't Britain without a strong Royal Navy. I totally agree with that. And it's not just because of the tradition and heritage. It's because we are an island nation and we cannot feed ourselves. Like in World War II, Britain tried very hard to feed itself. Like it plowed up every piece of land it possibly could plow up in World War II. And with a much smaller population than she has today, she still couldn't feed herself. So people saying, oh yeah, Britain could feed itself. Maybe if we got rid of every single piece of woodland in the whole country, and if we farmed like land up in the hills and mountains that is like barely worth farming, maybe we might come close to it, but we still couldn't do it. And it would basically completely change the whole nature of the UK. So people who say that, just talking nonsense. Autarky is not something Britain can do. in terms of food. Just not possible.
Yeah, there was a thing I saw recently when I think the government was talking about bringing in the fisheries protection unit because Brexit, came about.
Yep.
And there was obviously all these sort of the globlib sort of idiots on social media were all out and about in droves saying, oh, they're literally getting the Navy to sink and drown like fishermen and migrant boats. And I thought, well, the fishermen, the what's it called? The fishermen, is it the fisherman protection squadron?
Fishery
Fishery
protection squadron.
I mean, that's been around since almost Henry VIII's time.
Yep, absolutely.
It's not like a new thing. Like Boris Johnson wasn't rubbing his hands behind a desk somewhere. Well, I kind of wish he was, but like planning to sink these little boats coming across the channel, and yeah. So like the whole idea of having like a navy is like a long thing, and it's been around for a reason.
Yep.
We are kind of vulnerable. I mean, obviously it's that guy again, but Churchill used to think the Battle of the Atlantic was far more important than the Battle of Britain, despite the fact everyone knows of the Battle of Britain.
Yeah, but Churchill said the Battle of the Atlantic, which was the battle to supply Britain with food and raw materials and what have you, was the one thing that kept him up at night. So yeah, true. And I'm not a big Churchill fanboy, as many people will know who followed my my channel on Minds and like the streams I do on YouTube. But I'm not a Churchill fanboy by any means. But he was quite correct. The Battle of the Atlantic was the one thing that could have lost Britain the war. Like if the RAF had lost the Battle of Britain, they would have withdrawn to the north of England, which was beyond the range of German fighter cover, and they would have just got stronger there. And the Royal Navy, if the Germans had tried to invade with the really few warships they had left after the Royal Navy and the Norwegians had sunk about a third of their fleet in the Norwegian campaign, the Royal Navy would have simply sunk them, and any Germans who managed to get ashore wouldn't have got any resupply and would have lost. It was impossible for Hitler in World War II to invade Britain, and actually Churchill knew that very well.
Yeah.
It was a good way of bringing the people together and all this kind of stuff, but like it was not a practical proposition for the Germans, and the German Navy and even the German army knew it. There was no way it was a real operation of war. It was completely impossible. So yeah, the Battle of the Atlantic was the one thing in World War II that if Britain had lost, it would have knocked her out of the war, because when your population is starving, you're going to have to surrender.
Yeah. So Ben Gale said in the chat, he said, I think he was referring to them being less chance of heroism, not that there are zero heroes. And there's a big difference between a battle of a few hundred people where one strong man can swing in advance and the trenches of World War One. Well, I mean, obviously there's a point on that, especially if you go back quite far to, like, let's say antiquity. There's a great number of battles back in the olden days that actually didn't have that many casualties as a percentage, just simply because it was mostly about outmaneuvering one another, and the armies would march about. They'd have a few scuffles. There'd be a couple of raids. They'd have a break again. They'd meet back up. They'd have a march around, try and outmaneuver one another, and then usually your kings or your lords or whatever would meet up and discuss terms if there was terms to be discussed.
Yeah, don't disagree with any of that.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously nowadays it's kind of quite different for a number of reasons, because like especially now, like you can't even just run away from the front line, because you could be tracked down with video surveillance and all sorts back home, like desertion is much more easily punishable
and killed by artillery miles behind the lines in any case. No, it is different, obviously it is, but there is still heroism in war. It's mostly personal heroism, like between mates, I think, for the most part. You can read accounts of like I remember there was a Gurkha soldier in Afghanistan who fought off about 30 Taliban on his own, and he ended up, when he ran out of ammunition for his machine gun, he ended up throwing the bloody the machine gun base at one of these guys. Like he ran out of grenades, he ran out of ammunition, and he still wasn't defeated. I mean, that's heroism, So yeah, you still get that. But yeah, of course, there's less than there used to be. Like as soon as you get gunpowder weapons, it becomes less common. And obviously when you've got machine guns and automatic rifles and artillery and all the rest of it that you have these days, then yes, it's much less common. Of course it is. I don't know. By the way, I need to ask you this: did you actually read up at all about that guy that Academic Agent was discussing? Did you read up on any of his background? Yeah, there was a lot of stuff that Academic Agent didn't mention about it.
Yeah, he was pretty. He's pretty fringe in a way.
He was, and he was also very anti-colonialist and imperialist. Like he didn't like it. He was, because he was American, of course. So he was very anti-empires and so on. And obviously he was a big Adolf fan and all the rest of it. But Adolf dealt with lots of Arab nationalists and these people in World War II that many of our white brothers forget about. So we'll see.
Yeah, and so what was I saying before? My lamp stopped working. So like one of the problems we see now as well, like another instance, is that people back home just don't seem as interested. They don't seem as engaged in military exploits as they used to. And
are they exposed to them much these days? I don't think they are they?
Well, yeah, I mean that's the other problem, isn't it, as well? Like I suppose back in the day, if you were to look at something like, let's say, the Crimean War, even then, the press would want to stay on the good side of the king, and part of that would involve of the monarch, and part of that would involve, essentially sucking up to the various projects of the monarch, which would include military exploits. So I suppose there's that. And I suppose also the media very much tries to dictate to people today what they should be interested in.
Yeah, and they don't cover most of the military stuff. They certainly don't cover the Royal Navy very much. Because, obviously most of the stuff the Royal Navy does is like over the horizon on the ocean. So people don't know what they're doing. And one of the disadvantages of having a very small fleet, relatively speaking, that Britain has these days, is that the Royal Navy doesn't have enough spare ships to do the things they used to do, like Navy days, when you could go to your local port at Portsmouth or Devonport or up in Scotland or wherever, and go and visit a Royal Navy ship, which they used to do regularly, but they don't have enough ships to do that now because they're all bloody working all the time,
Yeah. I mean, actually, small side point, but talk about aircraft carriers, right? They can only run for about 100 days of the year, can't they? Once you discount maintenance, services, stuff like that.
Not really.
No?
I mean, no, not really. You can go longer than that. And basically, like Britain, if Britain wanted to have an aircraft carrier available absolutely constantly all the time, you'd really need 3.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah.
One, to cover downtime, and two,
yeah.
because you don't, you want to be able to cover like 2 theatres or so.
Well, it's not even that. What it is that it's the basic rule of warships is that if you want one operational, you need 3. So if you've got 9 ships in a say you've got 9 particular destroyers, if you want one all the time, you're going to end up out of those 9. You're going to have 3 ships available all the time because one ship is almost always going to be in some sort of refit, to have additional equipment fitted and defects repaired and this kind of stuff. And then you're going to have another one which might have an accident or something breaks or what have you, and you have to fix that. And the other one, the third ship is the one that's always around, if you see what I mean. It's a general rule. Now, it's got a bit better these days because we've got better at making the ships. And so with 2 aircraft carriers, Britain will basically have one available all the time. And in a dire emergency, like something like the Falklands War, for example, we could probably get both of them to sea within a few weeks. Although the Royal Navy would struggle to man both of them at the moment because one of the problems in the Royal Navy is it needs an increase in manpower. And in a Western Navy, one of the biggest expenses is actually paying for the crew. because people expect a reasonable wage, and obviously if you're going to be away for 3 or 6 months or whatever it might be in the Navy, they expect a better wage, understandably. So there's that. But what I would say, like to white pill it a little bit, a British carrier task force is going to go into the Indian Ocean and the Pacific later this year, which I'm really looking forward to because my son's probably going to be on HMS Queen Elizabeth, and I'm going to go and see him in Sydney Harbour if come hell or high water, and hopefully get a bit of a tour around HMS Queen Elizabeth as well. But we're sending a Royal Navy carrier task force to the Indian Ocean and the Pacific this year, and it's going to be HMS Queen Elizabeth with F-35B fighter bomber jets on board, and also helicopters, obviously. She's going to have 2 air defense destroyers, 2 anti-submarine frigates, and also a British hunter-killer submarine as part of the task group, plus Royal Fleet auxiliary supply ships for fuel and food and like extra weapons or ammunition and this kind of stuff. And she will be joined at various stages by some European ships, and once she gets to the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, almost certainly by American and Australian ships as well. And part of what they're going to do is a freedom of navigation thing through the South China Sea. Basically, they're going to sail this fleet through the South China Sea and tell the Chinese to get fucked. If you want to do something about it, you can, which they won't, of course, if they've got any brains. So you've got to look at it that way. One of the strengths of the Royal Navy, relative to most other navies in the world, apart from the Americans, is that most of the Royal Navy can be deployed almost anywhere in the world. The Royal Fleet Auxiliary, which is the supply ships of the Navy, are just about strong enough to still do that. So the Royal Navy's, like the 70% of its strength could be deployed anywhere in the world and operate because it can be supplied. So that makes the Royal Navy much stronger than its mere numbers may make it look like.
Yeah. So Ben Gale said it would probably help if they made their adverts look less like YMCA videos. Yeah, their adverts. I don't know if you've seen them over in Australia.
I watched them on YouTube. I watched them on YouTube, although I would say this to Ben Gale and to you, Aaron. Go and check out the Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm advert, the most recent one, which you can find on YouTube. It is the best British Armed Forces advert that's been done for many years.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I will say in the Navy's defence specifically is I think their ads aren't as bad as the Army's.
The Army are cringe these days. They are cringe these days. The Army was good. Like when I joined, the adverts for the Army were the professionals, Join the professionals, because the British Army were damn good back in the day. And they were excellent ads, and it was all about going to different countries, seeing what you could do physically, sports that you could play, and cute chicks who liked you, the kind of stuff that appeals to young men, is who you want in the Army, basically. So yeah, the Army adverts used to be great in the 80s and even into the 90s, but they're shit these days. But I will say the best British Armed Forces ad I've seen recently is the Fleet Air Arm one, which was done recently, which is great. And it's talking to a pilot of an F-35B. There's no chicks in it. There's no bullshit like that. And it's about, be a carrier pilot and do, in peacetime, the most dangerous job in the armed forces is probably being a carrier pilot. So don't do that. Don't do that if you're a wimpy type person, So
yeah, because they still see quite a lot of action, don't they?
Well, every single British air-to-air kill since either 1947 or 1949, depending who you believe, has been Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm rather than RAF.
Yeah, and if you're flying into an intervention like Libya, if we'd had the Queen Elizabeth operational when we went into Libya, we would have been flying off of that instead of out of Italy. And you've got situations like Bosnia, where a huge amount of aircraft carrier aircraft were used there, not necessarily by us, but
Yeah,
by
no,
us.
actually the Royal Navy did use Sea Harriers over Bosnia. Yes, they did. Yeah, they did.
What
The
aircraft
Sea
carrier were
Harriers,
they off of?
they were off of the Invincible class small
Right.
carriers. Yeah, like Invincible, Ark Royal, and was it Indomitable? Can't remember now. But anyway, there were three, and they off of those, a lot of Fleet Air Arm Sea Harriers operated over Bosnia.
Yeah.
They also the Sea Harriers got worked to death in Afghanistan, also like based on land rather than the sea. They got worked to death in Afghanistan, and then when it came down to in 2010, after the financial crash, when Cameron's decided that we're going to like cut the armed forces budget. The RAF decided they would sooner keep their ancient Tornadoes than the Sea Harrier, the Harriers. Actually, they were Harrier Mark Fives by then, which was like the partially American version, which were more bomb trucks than fighters, to be honest. But yeah, so they got rid of those at that stage. One of the problems, like the good thing, is that this year the squadron that operates at the moment, that operates F-35B Stovall fighter bombers, is RAF. But this year the first Fleet Air Arm Squadron stands up, which I think is a very good thing, because the Fleet Air Arm Squadrons will actually be based on carriers, because like the Navy understands that no Navy can rely on land-based air power. They don't turn up when you need them, like. Whereas if you've got it on an aircraft carrier to cover a fleet, they're there, like in the Falklands, for example. And also, obviously, like in the Falklands, they can support landing forces and all that kind of stuff as well. Whereas if you're depending on land-based air power, something will go wrong in comms. The RAF will take too long to take off, or something bad will happen. And like when the enemy aircraft come in, there'll be no RAF aircraft over the fleet. It's happened many, many, many times. And it happens to other navies as well as the Royal Navy. And the Royal Navy has learned that lesson the hard way. And that's one reason you need aircraft carriers, as well as obviously power projection, because it enables you to put a powerful air force anywhere in the world. And you don't need basing rights from anybody, because your ship's a sovereign piece of British land sailing on the ocean.
So River Seven said, "Being sailors is only a small part of our legacy. We're not defined by the empire." A lot of people say this, but like it's true, we're not defined by the empire, but the empire was defined by Britain and by British people. And like the military is often, I think, a way that that British people can be expressed in ways that regular society doesn't allow for. Yeah, I mean, and that's also why I think, like, if you look at like this is also why, like, the Fabians and the left have always gone after the military, like with reckless abandon. They were always trying to pos the military, and they've never quite managed it.
Well, I would say to somebody who says that being sailors is only a small part of our legacy, like the real founder of the Royal Navy in many respects was Alfred the Great, because Alfred the Great realized that in order to protect Wessex and England from the Viking raids, and obviously the Vikings were great sailors and raiders, like being a Viking, that's what it was all about. Like, they were Scandinavians or Danes or whatever they were. Being a Viking was something you did. It was going on raids and sometimes trading, but generally raids and this kind of stuff. And Alfred the Great realized that like you had to have an English navy to defend against these Viking longships. And so he, in many respects, and his son Athelstan were really the fathers of the Royal Navy in many respects.
Yeah, and because I think I kind of a bit hot and cold on the guy, but Peter Hitchens has kind of said roughly in Abolition of Britain, he said like there was an instance where every town and city, every factory or every street, I think, had someone who a working class man who was significantly more well travelled than your sort of middle class person who might have gone on holiday to France or Germany or
Absolutely.
such.
Yeah.
I mean, you still see that now. I mean, we've got guys in our area who are like army vets, and they've been to Afghanistan, and it's like how many people are actually going to go to Afghanistan on holiday ever?
No, nobody sensible. But yeah. Of course, Peter. Hang on, that was my weekly contribution from my little dog, Rudy. I'm going to have to put his picture up on here at some stage because he always makes a contribution. He's now looking at me as if to say, "What are you talking about?" But anyway, yeah, Peter Hitchens, of course, comes from a naval family. His father was a Royal Navy officer in World War II.
Yeah,
and
yeah, he grew up
he talks about the grey warships going in and out of Portsmouth in his book. So yeah, I've got a bit of room for Peter Hitchens from that point of view for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, so talking about the like the adverts and the left trying to take over the military, one of the things you see this in America as well now, but you see it in Britain, even though it's not as obvious, is where they've desperately tried to co-opt the military. It's now sort of this weird dual institution where there's like an inner section, which is your soldiers, your sailors, your airmen, and they're still very much how they've always been. And then there's the sort of the outside of the institution that's very it is completely different. It's like any other government department.
Yeah, I think it's two things, Adam, and I'd say, like in America in particular, like the trigger pullers, your your basic soldiers, NCOs, and junior officers in the American Army and the U.S. Marine Corps. Most of those guys are still white. Yeah, they're still the majority in those. But there again, you've got all these like overweight Black African women who drive supply trucks and this kind of stuff. And so obviously there's a difference, but like it's kind of like there's always been this difference between the combat arms, the TF arms, which is to say in the Army's case, the infantry, the cavalry armor, which is the tanks, the artillery, and also the Royal Engineers or the engineers generally. Those are the four TF arms, and those guys. There's always been that separation between those four TF arms that actually do the fighting and like face the enemy and this kind of stuff, and the supply services. And it's the supply services who are more posed than the actual fighting arms in the army. And that's certainly true in America, and I strongly suspect it's true in the UK, probably to a slightly lesser extent.
Yeah. So here's another one as well. I mean, this isn't like me interviewing Iron Duke or anything, but well, how do you feel about Muslims in the armed forces? Because I don't actually.
There aren't any.
There's hardly any. There's very few, even compared to Sikhs, which is a tiny community in the UK. And yet there's so many Sikhs in the armed forces compared to Muslims. But even for the individual Muslims, like I don't actually dislike Muslims or Islam at all. I just don't think they should be here. But by the same token, ones that do join the army often have to overcome quite a lot of stigma from their communities because of the sort of places the military's been fighting in recent times. And I'm not. I don't know. There's a little bit of Civnat in me wants to come out and say, yeah, that guy's pretty based and British, even though that would be stupid for me to say that.
I don't know, man. Look, the only thing I will say is that far more British Muslims join the Islamic State than join the British Armed Forces. Like I think it's like 4 or 5 times as many. So the number of British Muslims in the British Armed Forces is so small as to be irrelevant, really.
I mean, if your dream sort of, let's say, Tory government got in that was, I don't know, monarchist, pro-military, pro-repatriation, would you be for giving a pardon to anyone of a non-white background who'd served in the military?
If they've been in the British Armed Forces, yeah, probably. Yeah, if they'd served with no blemish in the British Armed Forces, yeah, probably I would actually.
But I mean, otherwise, even then, even with me saying that about Muslims, it's still a problem because even then, I think quite a few of them are over, not just Muslims, but other groups in general are overrepresented in selling military and state secrets back to whatever their ancestral homeland is anyway. That seems to be a story that crops up quite a lot.
I don't know, man. I'm not too sure that most of the countries that Muslims come from could really use many military secrets
Well, I know there
that
was a
well.
thing a while ago about a guy.
The Chinese certainly can.
Yeah, the Chinese do a lot, and I know
Yeah,
that
and
there was a story
they
that
do
the
that a
Iranians
lot.
did as
Yeah.
well.
Well, yeah, but how well can Iran use that stuff? I'm not sure, to be honest with you. They have in Iran British chieftain tanks, but they can barely keep them running. You know.
Yeah.
So, although to be
Yeah.
fair, the chieftain tank was a hard tank to keep running, even when the Brits had it. But yeah,
That's very old, isn't it? Now.
well,
That's
it
really
is.
old tech.
Well, it is, but it's still got a 120 millimeter gun on it and very thick armor, and relative to like most of the tanks that see action in the world, which tend to be quite older than the chieftain, it's quite a powerful weapon still. But the Iranians can't really keep them running. And I'm not an enemy of Iran. Like I don't think there should be a war against Iran. I don't think Iran's any threat to UK, whatever. I don't think she's a threat to America either. I think she is a potential threat to Israel, but that's a different story.
Yeah, I'm not really against Iran. I don't, as long as they're over there, I don't really mind. Although that's actually another point, actually, because
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'd like Iran to get back to where it was when the Shah was in charge. Yeah, like I'd like it to get back to that traditional stuff and get rid of all these crazy fucking mullahs and all that kind of shit. But basically speaking, Iran is not a threat to the UK. I mean, yeah, she's a small threat to ships going through the Gulf and this kind of stuff. And the Royal Navy needs to guard against that, which it does. But she's basically, like, you know, any time that America and Britain wanted to crush Iran in terms of like their little naval small boats and this kind of stuff, they could. It's not difficult.
Yeah. And well, yeah, I mean, one of the other problems that we get from Iran, even though this isn't an excuse to go to war with Iran, obviously, is it's like the highest number of asylum seekers into the UK from any single country is from Iran. And I've been reading Roger Scruton recently, and he actually makes a kind of unusual but really good point in one of his books, where he says that the Geneva Convention was essentially just allows countries, instead of to kill its dissenters, it just exports them.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's the Geneva Convention. Isn't that more the United Nations Convention on refugees?
Yeah, but isn't that tied in with the Geneva Convention?
It probably is, but I mean, the Geneva Convention was a much earlier thing, which was basically to do with how you treat prisoners of war, and America abrogated that in Afghanistan and Iraq for reasons best known to America. Personally, I wouldn't, because I want other countries to treat our prisoners quite well. But you know, America does what America does.
Yeah, I kind of feel to a certain aspect, war is war, and you need to treat it seriously, and that means sometimes cutting off heads and putting them on pikes. But then I also think politics should be done that way too. So you know.
Well, yeah, I see what you're saying. I don't know. I just think that the Geneva Convention, like the reason Japan got so much flack in World War II was because she didn't go by the Geneva Convention. Like Germany didn't go by the Geneva Convention with Russian prisoners, but she did with British and Commonwealth and American prisoners. And Russia obviously didn't go by the Geneva Convention with German prisoners either. So you know, yeah, I think there's something to be said for making war as less brutal. Yeah, I know liberals like don't really like that in many respects. You know, they want war to be unthinkable. Whereas I think war is, as what's his name says, it's an extension of politics, basically, which it obviously is. So yeah, I don't know. But yeah, in terms of bringing refugees into other countries, if they're a genuine political refugee for a genuine reason, I'm not totally against that. But I think it gets abused all the time. But with these economic migrants that the UK continually gets coming across from France, which is not a country which is in the middle of a war, fucked up as France is, it's not in the middle of a war. It's not an unsafe country for these economic migrants to stay in. Those guys, like ideally, I would just like intercept them with Royal Navy or border force ships and basically just land them back in France again and say, there you go, boys. If you can't do that, then my preferred solution would be you get Ascension, which is a volcanic British island in the South Atlantic that has no indigenous population. The only people there are military guys. I'd build a camp there, and every single one of these guys who arrives in UK would be within 24 hours or 48 hours sent off to Ascension Island on that camp, and they would stay there until they were deployed. So that every single one of those people arriving in UK knows they won't even get to stay in UK. They'll go to this middle of nowhere island with hardly a tree on it, and they'll stay there until they're deployed. And that is pretty much what Australia did to solve its illegal boat people immigrant thing, and it worked.
Yeah, that's kind of funny though, isn't it? Because if you try to do that in the UK now, as it is now, the media would have a shit fit.
The media in Australia, the media in Australia had a shit fit to some degree, but how much of a shit fit they had was limited by the fact that the vast majority of Australians didn't want these people to just waltz into Australia.
But that's the thing: a vast majority of British people don't want it. So where's the? And I suppose this kind of ties into a contemporary problem as well, because aren't you having an issue there at the moment where Facebook is censoring mainstream news sources in Australia, or is it the other way around?
Yeah, no, it is. It's doing that. Yeah.
So what's the story on that?
I don't honestly understand it, mate. To be honest, I've looked at it, and I'm not sure what it is. I think what it was the Australian government wanted to stop Facebook just pinching Australian news stories and putting them up. Why anyone wants to put a mainstream media news story up on their Facebook page, I have no idea. I've never been on Facebook. Don't want to be on Facebook. Don't understand it. So Facebook said, no, you can't do that. And then the trouble was that in Australia, some people like the SES, which is the State Emergency Services, which is volunteers who help when there's really bad weather or a flood or a drought or a fire, and also the bush fire brigades, who are also volunteers. They had Facebook
like a very
pages.
Anglo thing.
Yeah, they were all volunteers, and these guys had Facebook pages where they would like tell their members to do something or warn people in an area about a bushfire or some bullshit like that, you know. Sorry, I don't mean bullshit, but you know what I mean, something like that. Yeah. And that got banned by Facebook as well, although apparently Facebook has said that's a mistake. I don't know. I think a lot of it is a storm in a teacup, to be honest with you. I mean, not that I'm a Mark Zuckerberg fan, because I'm certainly not, but there was a very good article on oh crikey, I'm gonna have to look what they're called now. Wait a minute. Where are we? Here we go. There's a really good article on tradnewsblogspot.com. Facebook declares war on Australia. It's well worth reading, and it's kind of humorous. So yeah, that's what I kind of think about that. So I don't know. I think it's a bit of a storm in the teacup. Like Trad Blogspot was kind of saying, you know, the Australian Prime Minister has been captured by Facebook. No, they were just taking the piss, basically, which I think is probably the right way to deal with that. I
I
mean,
mean, we kind of see this. We kind of see this now with in the UK with. Did you see what happened with the YouTube channel Voice of Wales?
no.
They're a cool little YouTube channel. They talk about sort of Welsh matters, um, and they do little streams and that. And they were a small channel. They had about 5,000 subs, I think, and I
Mm,
think they're now up to 8.5, maybe even 9,000.
yep.
And that was because the BBC Wales did like a hit piece on them.
Don't tell me they're Nazis.
I think they called them racist. I'm not sure. Oh, they did. Oh, yeah, they did bring up the Proud Boys. They said the Proud Boys that are put down as a terrorist cell in Canada.
What, the same Proud Boys who were headed by a Mexican American in America, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I actually know Proud Boys here in the UK, and
Yeah.
they're basically just a glorified drinking club.
Yeah, they're not racist, that's for sure.
No, I actually find them kind of a bit cringe. Well, no,
Yeah,
they're lovely guys, but they're a little bit. They're not very radical. They're not that radical.
no, they're not. They're not extreme right at all. But then everyone is extreme right. Boris Johnson is extreme right according to some of the British media, which is like a utter joke. But there we go.
Yeah, I mean, surveys have been done that show that even the most conservative politician is usually to the left, or at least over the top of sort of a majority of voters in the UK,
Yeah.
let alone conservative voters.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I don't think there's certainly no modern Conservative MP who is as right wing as me, and like I'm fairly right wing, but I'm no sort of Nazi larper. So it's like I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's and of course the thing is, like people often say, like people will say to me, like, "Oh, right wing this and right wing that." I'm like, "Who?" They go, "You've got a conservative government." I'm like, "And?" It doesn't mean anything.
Well,
Well, they're right wing, and it's like you
yeah,
have to ask at one point. Well, right wing to who? Right wing to the media, or right
yeah.
wing to the populace?
But I mean, the idea that the Alexander Boris Johnson's government is right wing or conservative, except in inverted commas, is just ridiculous, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, going back, I think it was Peter Hitchens again, but I think it was him that said that he's a more convincing Blair than Tony Blair himself, which is
Yeah,
pretty accurate.
yeah.
I
No,
found
I
what he
don't
said
just.
anyway.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I think the differences between Alexander Boris Johnson and that vile traitor Tony Blair would be paper thin, frankly. Paper thin.
Yeah,
I just don't understand how anyone thinks that Boris Johnson is conservative. In what respect? Socially, certainly isn't.
no,
Freedom, individual freedom, certainly isn't. Keeping the economy going, certainly isn't. Locking people up in their homes for months at a time, certainly isn't. Sorry, in what way is he conservative? He's not a conservative in any way, shape, or form. And that's even before the fact he's completely pussy whipped by his girlfriend, who's not even his wife.
yeah,
I don't know, man. It's beyond me that how anyone can regard Alexander Boris Johnson as really conservative. He just isn't.
wasn't he in this Greta Thunberg drive sort of how would you say leak?
But probably, I don't know about that, mate. But you'll have to tell me a bit more about it. What was going on there?
I haven't really looked into it enough myself. But essentially, Greta Thunberg accidentally leaked a Google Drive that had, and it's what started this whole kafar over Modi and the Indian farmers thing.
Uh-huh.
And I was looking through it. I saved as much of it as I could. I didn't get all of it. But I was having a look through, and I did see that like Boris Johnson was mentioned in there.
Well,
And I
he
don't
goes
know if
on.
it was. I don't know because it was about something about tweets. or like tweets that have been made that were like part of this tweet storm they were trying to do, which was again supposed to be part of manufactured consent and sort of building sort of pressure. And one of them in there, I couldn't tell whether they were saying that you had to send a tweet that was copied and pasted that mentioned Boris Johnson, or if you had to, or if they're talking about a tweet that Boris Johnson himself had made.
Weird. Well, not weird, really. Boris Johnson is not really a conservative. I remember years ago watching a debate, which might have been TED Talks. It was something like this. It was some posy crap. And it was Boris Johnson defending the ancient Greeks against Mary Beard defending the ancient Romans. Now, Mary Beard is really a very left-wing historian, okay? But on the other hand, the Romans are more based than the ancient Greeks. Of course they are. And yet Boris Johnson was there defending the ancient Greeks, and basically pointing out how much more liberal and shirt-lifting they were than the Romans. And he lost the debate, I was happy to say. Even though Mary Beard makes some stuff which is quite interesting about the Romans, but she's a very left-wing historian. I mean, it's almost impossible to find a British academic these days who is not left-wing. So, but Boris Johnson was defending the left-wing position there, So it tells you all you need to know. And as I say, Boris is a made-up name. None of his friends or anyone who knows him or his family call him Boris. He's called Alex for Alexander.
Yeah.
Which is why I always call him Alexander Boris Johnson, because Boris is a made-up name. It's there for media. And people who still believe it are idiots, frankly.
Yeah, I try to just refer to him as Johnson, just like any other politician would be.
Yeah.
But yeah, the thing with where was I going to go with that? Shit, I've completely lost my train of thought.
You were talking about the Greta Thunberg thing and the
Oh yeah. Oh, actually, I was going to bring up about that debate. Actually, the one between Mary Beard and she's very left wing, isn't she? She's one of my friends reads a lot of her books, and he's always like telling me like her points, and I'm kind of like, mate, I don't care, but I kind of let him go on with it, but and essentially throughout that whole debate, they just did the whole my Romans are more liberal than your Greeks, but it's kind of cringe, but it's also kind of weird this because it was kind of unusual, because the whole homosexuality thing in Greece is largely overblown. Like it's not really anywhere near as common as they like to make out, and it's to a large part quite a sort of left-wing LARP. And yet they really it's funny because in sort of low school discourse, like when people are talking about this in regular sort of settings, people will talk about it as if it's true, but then when you get up to the higher court sort of academic settings, they won't say it, but they dance around the point as if everyone knows that it's true.
Yeah. Oh, listen, look, if you read ancient history, and like I read quite a lot of ancient history, and I've done for years, sure, the Romans to some degree regarded the Greeks as shirt-lifters. They did, because it was more common in Greece.
Yeah.
But what you get these days is you'll get historians turn around and say, well, what mattered in Rome was whether you penetrated or were penetrated. And there's actually not that much evidence for that I have seen, to be honest with you. There isn't. No. Like, they say it, but backing it up with evidence, they can't, because there isn't. Like, we've got a tiny percentage of ancient writings that survived. And they're from a very small section of the population also. But then we can look at stuff like all the graffiti in places like the place that got blown up by the volcano. I've been there, for fuck's sake, I don't remember its name. But anyway, there's all that stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's nothing in the graffiti that really supports that. And like, there's a lot of very like the sort of graffiti you see today, you know, like it's not that different. But there isn't a great deal of stuff that supports gay sex.
Well, the other thing as well with the Greek one is that you're talking about a society that was probably in what we would now call our own state or consider our own sort of similar state of decline. Like obviously I'm going to do this stream with Brutus at some point. I've got to try and work it around my work schedule on the Iliad.
Yeah, I've been
And
looking forward to that. I wish you guys
yeah,
would actually get that together. That would be
yeah,
good.
it will be soon. But one of the things that comes up, sort of that people try to push a button with the Iliad was that like Patroclus and Achilles were in a gay relationship.
Yeah, I actually thought that was true, that Patroclus was like his gay lover kind of thing.
Yeah, because a lot of the criticism, because a lot of the Greek writers who insinuated that are from like 400 to 500 years after Homer.
Ah, okay, that's interesting. You see.
Yeah, so it's kind of it could still be true, but I don't know. I'm very 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 skeptical
What
because
what do you,
because
what do you, what do you think about the Macedonians and that stuff? Because like I recently rewatched bloody Oliver Stone's film about Alexander the Great, and there's some good bits in that film. It's vastly too long, but there's
yeah.
some good bits in it. But frankly, the blokes kissing stuff will like turn my stomach, to be honest. But there we go. So do you think that's true there?
I'm not sure. I don't think so, but it's hard to say. It's very hard to say. I know they did a study. There was a study a while ago that I heard about where they analysed Greek pottery, and
Mm.
even though, of course, most of the pottery we have would be from the later era again, even then, I think they found that only 2 to 3% of it had homoerotic themes, and most of that was actually negative to homoeroticism in general. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I'm the same as everyone. I've read that the Spartans, for example, had gay lovers when they were in the Spartan army, and obviously everyone's heard about the sacred band of Thebes and all this kind of stuff.
mm,
But again, our sources are so damn limited that you don't know how much truth there is in that stuff.
yeah, a lot of people say that ancient Greece did have a problem with pedophrasty. Um,
Yeah, older guys like having younger lovers. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
that's certainly what I've read. Yeah.
and again, I don't know to what extent that is late era or if that just permeates all the way through ancient Greece. But I mean, another way of looking at this is like these people. A lot of the I think that was four or so people that claimed in ancient Greece that that Achilles and Patroclus were gay lovers, and these people are around at the same time as Plato, who's like sort of like their version of Thomas Carlyle. It's sort of
Yeah.
insanely reactionary, sort of talking about social decay, literally writing allegories about the sort of the downfall of nations in much the same way that reactionaries are writing about this stuff sort of over the last 100 years
Yeah.
here. So
Well, I read the history of the Peloponnesian War. Obviously, a very famous book from ancient Greece. There's nothing about that stuff in that book, like
no,
nothing whatever. And that is probably one of the most accurate history books that ancient Greeks wrote that we still have. And there's not a
yeah,
single mention of it anywhere in the whole book,
mm,
which you think there would be, because like the guy basically was trying to write actual history, you know. So I don't know. I have my doubts about it. Put it that way. I mean, certainly, if you read some authors today, you would think that gay and LGBTQ XYZ crap was vastly more common than it really is.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
wonder if that wouldn't be true of the ancient Greeks as well.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, I mean, I suppose like it would. I mean, I imagine if you went back maybe 200 years, the idea of talking about the ancient Greeks as being riddled with homosexuality would probably be you'd probably be considered quite weird for making such claims.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Like I said, I mean, like I've been reading ancient history since I was probably, I don't know, 8, 9 years old, something like that, many years ago. And it certainly wasn't a big deal years ago in older history books. And these days it is, and I strongly suspect that's because there's an agenda these days which there wasn't, as you say, like 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah. And I mean, I've read Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, but I've only read the abridged version, and I don't remember him mentioning anything like that in there. But that might just be because I've read the abridged version.
Well, that's on that's actually on YouTube. That you can get the whole audio book of Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall on YouTube.
It must be really long.
It is. It's hours and hours and hours, but you can kind of listen to it when you're doing something else, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Five Liver Brutus is on holiday. He'll be back in a week or two, I believe. Hopefully, we're going to get Grief on here soon. He said he would come on 20 minutes ago, but maybe he's not home yet, so we'll see. Adam, and if you're in touch with him, please send him the link if you've got it.
Yeah, I haven't got any contact details for him, sadly.
Okay, well, I emailed it to him and spoke to him on it. He said he'd come on about 9, so he's sorry, he said he'd come on. Yeah, he did say he'd come on about 9. Hopefully he'll still come on, but if he doesn't, there we go. You can only ask, you can't force. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Ben Gale, the Navy is more than the Empire. It's been central since the Spanish Armada. Yeah, it has. I mean, the Royal Navy, at very, very least, traces its ancestry back to Queen Elizabeth I's Royal Navy. And the aircraft carrier, HMS Queen Elizabeth, is not named after our current Queen. It's named after Queen Elizabeth I, who was the Queen when Britain defeated the Spanish Armada, which many people don't realise. Like, HMS Queen Elizabeth isn't named after Queen Elizabeth II. She's named after Queen Elizabeth I, and there have been Royal Navy capital ships named HMS Queen Elizabeth for like 250 years or more. So there you go. This is one change that there has been with the current generation of Royal Navy carriers. Well, actually, it's not really a change, but basically they have capital ship names. You know, what in the old days would have been battleships or battle cruisers. And that's the names they've got. I mean, personally, I would have preferred HMS Prince of Wales to be named. I would have preferred it to be named HMS Ark Royal, but there you go, didn't happen. So there we go. But even Ark Royal is a battleship name that goes back to Queen Elizabeth I.
Yeah. Are naval names getting worse?
There was an admiral who complained in the 1950s, a Royal Navy admiral, who said that the Navy list of the Royal Navy was increasingly looking like the Ordnance Survey map of the UK. And that is certainly true. But there again, you understand why navies do it, because if you give the ship the name of a town or a city, it tends to make it much harder for that government to scrap or sell that ship, because all the people in that town or city will complain, and the MP from that town or city will complain. So that's why you get like HMS London and HMS Belfast and all the rest of it. Like, and by the way, there are 2 new names of the Type 26 frigates. There's going to be a new HMS London and a new HMS Belfast. So you understand that. And some of those ships with town and city names are quite ancient. Like, there's been HMS London around for probably 300 years, There's been a HMS Belfast around certainly since the 19th century. So that's fair enough. But then you've also got to look, we've got the Type 45 frigates with HMS Daring and all that kind of stuff. And they're traditional Royal Navy names, and they're also traditional Royal Navy destroyer names. So they're good. I would like to see the Navy getting more of the old classical names back. I think that was a good thing. You know, HMS Leander and all of these ancient Greco-Roman names, I think were excellent. And I would like to see more of those.
Yeah.
Stan
was a great pub in. I don't even know how to say that. I've seen pubs named after ships actually.
Harperthy. Is that
Harperthy.
Harperthy, I think. But yeah, I mean, I've been to a lot of pubs with nice Royal Navy names. I went to this beautiful pub in Cornwall where you could actually tie your yacht up to a jetty and walk straight into the pub, which was really cool. Yeah, and she was named after a Royal Navy frigate in the Napoleonic Wars that was a very successful frigate. Can't remember her name now, but yeah, that was and it was a lovely pub, and like on the wall were all these pictures of Royal Navy warships, ancient and modern, and yeah, that was cool. I like that kind of stuff. It's really good. Sternalch, the new carrier, is actually HMS Prince of Wales. HMS Queen Elizabeth is the first of the class, and HMS Prince of Wales is the second. So yeah.
I think pubs open again, to be honest.
Well, yeah, it'd be good, wouldn't it? But apparently that's not allowed in our conservative-run Alexander Boris Johnson Britain. So,
yeah, I mean they're saying they won't even open up the barbers for another month. So I don't know what they're thinking for with the pubs.
I was watching on YouTube. I saw a few things saying Johnson's going to make some sort of announcement today or tomorrow, because apparently there's quite a lot of Conservative MPs who are really fucked off with him and want him to stop these lockdowns. I mean, sensibly enough, you know. So maybe that's it. Five Liver tells us it's pronounced Harper Hay. So there you go.
Right. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I can't even watch Boris Johnson on the TV anymore. I just kind of switch off.
I don't watch them. I used to watch the stuff because they all got off on YouTube, but I don't watch them anymore. Like we just had a 5-day lockdown in Victoria, in Australia for 19 cases, all of which were from overseas or from dictator Dan Andrews' pissed up, crapped hotel quarantine thing, which he uses his buddies from private security firms to run. There were 19 cases, all in the same places in like near the Melbourne airport, and he locked down the whole state for 25 days. Sorry, for 5 days, I beg your pardon. For no reason whatever. It was just absolutely crazy. But he's got this Twitter gang of left-wing socialists, because he's a left-wing socialist, obviously, who like try and protect him all the time and say, "Oh, we stand with Dan." And strange to say their names are all Karen something or other, but there we go.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know, man. I think I've probably like said as much as I can say about this fucking lockdown box, because I've done it week after week after week, and I had an actual complaint last time I did it, saying, although it was from that Dutch guy who really wants to be a German. What's his name?
Faust.
Yeah, Faust. Yeah. Like he sometimes he's quite sensible, but he hates Anglos, and he's Dutch, but really wants to be German. And like he said, "Oh yeah, another 40 minutes of going on about the lockdown." Well, fine, the lockdown's happening. What do you expect us to do? Ignore it? I don't get it. You know, I mean, what are we going to talk about? Are we going to talk about stuff that's happening that is bad, or should we just ignore it? Because like, there's all sorts of things we could ignore.
Yeah.
So, and like I say, Faust sometimes comes up with some good, interesting points. He's just
Sometimes.
ridiculous sometimes, but he's just ridiculously anti-Anglo. And I don't understand why he calls himself Dutch when he obviously really would prefer to be German.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I don't like talking about it, but sometimes you need to talk about it.
Yeah. There's a lot of things I talk about I don't really want to talk about, but you kind of have to.
Mm.
Because otherwise people don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, I saw someone actually. Yeah. I saw someone. Someone sent this to me actually. I saw someone posted today in a political Facebook page, which is just the worst places ever. And they were saying, oh well, it's kind of good actually. Flu deaths are down, right? So
Yeah.
maybe we should, even after coronavirus is gone, we should be wearing masks every year. And I kind of thought, like, they're kind of missing why flu deaths are down, for one, which is misdiagnosis, and also no, fuck off.
Yeah, no, I don't get it. I mean, I think it's deeply suspicious that flu deaths are down. So, at least. And they're not only down in the UK, they're down in America, they're down all over the Western world, which makes me suspect, as you say, misdiagnosis of flu for supposed China virus and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I'd imagine that if you are making people walk around with a muzzle on their face, you probably would see flu deaths down by a good number. But no, that's still not justification to make people wear them.
I don't even know if that would be the case, because like everything I've read is that your normal face masks that people are wearing, whether they be cloth masks or these paper ones that you see all over the street these days, which I'm sure is not at all pollution, don't stop viruses. Viruses are too small; they just go through those things.
Yeah, I think I looked at some data from the States a while ago. Funny enough, I actually read a fact check article where they were trying to say that these people claiming that the mask does nothing isn't true. And then in their own data that they provide, they show that the masks only actually prevent 3 to 4% of exposures, which is
Yeah,
nothing really, absolutely nothing.
yeah, and then you get twats like Fauci saying, "Oh, well, wear 2 masks."
Yeah, that was weird. Yeah, because I looked that up because I know that Sojo was a bit skeptical, but I went and looked it up, and yeah, he did actually say that, didn't he?
Yes, he did. He said, "Wear 2 masks."
That's really shocking.
And that's like, I mean, I can't wear a mask, okay, because like I get hyperventilation and I had a heart attack.
Mm.
So I'm exempt from wearing a mask, which it bores me to explain it to people, which I have to do nearly every single day. But anyway, but it's like it's bullshit. And you go on the bus, for example, and you have to wear one on the bus here in Victoria in Australia. But the kids don't. Like if you're under 16, you don't have to wear one. So, and whilst I understand that, like, the China virus ain't going to kill kids, it just doesn't. They can still catch it and spread it. So, if that was true, why aren't they wearing a mask? You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
there's just so much double think around it. It's just crazy. And like I said, where I live, 19 cases in the last, I don't know, month or whatever it is, and all in a couple of places, and all from dictator Dan Andrews' fucked up hotel quarantine nonsense. There's been no spread in the community at all. It's just nonsense. So yeah, it's just crap. And the masks, to my mind, are more a visual way of showing compliance than they are anything else. And that's why the politicians are pushing them.
Yeah.
I mean, you will have noticed that originally the UN health thing that is basically owned by the Chinese originally said, "Yeah, masks don't do anything," and then they changed their tune because politicians wanted them to. So
Yeah, because they were also all against closing borders. But America did it anyway. Trump did it anyway, and they were trying to say that he was wrong for doing so, and then they sort of backtracked on that. And
Yeah.
yet, despite the fact they backtracked on it, most of Europe is still open.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, a couple of things from the chat. Full of hate. The Naval College is quite cool. Yeah, HMS Britannia, the Royal Naval College. It's very cool. Proudest day of my life was watching my son pass out of that place. And Stan Alch, NBC training, all we needed to do was take our underoos off and put them on our head. Well, I'll tell you, Stan Alch, I did the Portland Battle Run in the British Army, which was, I can't remember now if it was 24 hours, 48 hours. And you were certainly wearing a respirator for 24 hours, if I remember rightly, but it might have only been 12. You had to do stuff in like gas chambers when they chuck CS gas at you. And then you had all these fucking, excuse my language, you had all these exercise types going around with CS gas. And what we were all doing is like, especially because most of us smoked in those days, talking about the early 1980s, like we were all doing smoking drills. You know, you lifted up your respirator, had a puff on your cigarette, and then put it down again. So we were all doing that shit, man. And it was one of the worst things I did in the British Army. I fucking hated it. And at the end of it, we had to do a company attack on this position on a wood on a hill in full noddy gear, which was all that NBC shit that made you sweat like a pig, and your respirator. And like me, like many other people, just made my respirator so loose that I could breathe around the sides of it because I was just over it by that stage. And at the end of it, the major of his company commander said, "Oh yeah, morale really picked up at the end when we did our attack. It was only because we knew it fucking finished." But yeah, so yeah, I did the Portland Battle Run, for fuck's sake. That was fucking funny. A long time ago. But yeah, hell. But I used to like our major because he would always turn around and say, "Fucking good show, chaps. Fucking good show." He was actually a very good officer. I liked him a lot. He was a good bloke, unlike our second lieutenant in charge of our platoon, who was a complete twat. But the major was quite a nice guy, and actually knew his business to some degree, which was the main thing we used to care about. But yeah. Hello, Marco Coletti Spaghetti. Well, I'm going to keep this. I'm going to keep this going to the top of the hour to give Grief a chance to join if he wants to, or Sojo, who was also invited, but you know, Sojo is semi-detached these days. So, but that's going to be the end of this unless anyone else joins. So we've got about 22 minutes, I guess.
So I'm not sure if you've seen this. This was originally posted as it was a story about Coca-Cola training its employees, but it's not actually Coca-Cola per se, although I think they use it. It's actually just a LinkedIn learning course. Like there's probably dozens of companies teaching this stuff, but they have this course called hang on, let me just try and get it up. They have this course called Understanding What It Means to Be White and Challenging What It Means to Be Racist.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And they have
that sounds like a good read.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking about, because you can do it for free if you sign up for a trial. So I'm thinking about doing it and just screen capping it all. And
well, if you can do it for free, I certainly wouldn't give the bastards any money. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, and yeah, just screen capping it all and maybe putting in a little video or something. But yeah, so it includes slides like try to be less white. And what they mean by try to be less white is be less oppressive, be less arrogant, be less certain, be less defensive, be less ignorant, be less humble, be more humble, listen, believe, break with apathy, and break with white solidarity. I really wish people did actually have white solidarity. But,
so basically everything they're saying is be weak.
Yeah, essentially.
What a surprise. What
And
is the price?
this was pushed by this Robin DiAngelo. I think that's her name. She did a book called White Fragility, which because there's actually I found out a while ago there's a Reddit for like black supremacist types,
Yeah.
and they have a term, fragile egos, which is their slur for white people, which I thought was
Right.
it's kind of funny because if you go in there and start quoting crime statistics, they really start screaming.
Yeah, I bet they don't like that at all.
No, so yeah, they kind of got to work on that ego problem, but yeah, so one of the other things that was kind of funny in there that I thought one of the slides that people were posting up was there's this one. It says in the US and other Western nations, white people are socialized to feel that they are inherently superior because they're white. And then it says research shows that by age 3 to 4, children understand that it's better to be white. I'm kind of wondering what that research actually shows. I would probably assume that research is more that children are ethnocentric at that age.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I bet if you ask black kids at that age, they'd probably, or like say Zulu kids, for example, they'd probably say by 3 or 4, most Zulu kids will probably say it's best to be Zulu. You know, I really think
Yeah.
that's very strongly true. Same as if you ask Sikhs or like Iranians or anyone else.
Yeah, I mean that just seems like that just seems like a big load of nothing, and I mean, but the thing is though, the way they even phrased that, where they said, I've got to get it back up, uh, by age whatever, children understand it's better to be white. Well, if you were to indoctrinate them in school into believing in the idea of white privilege, that black people are literally shot in the street by the police, they would come to much the same conclusion, even though it's not true, but also doesn't say what the learning board that's put this together is trying to claim.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much common sense, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
I just, I don't understand how anyone can think any in groups and out groups are like common to all human beings of all colors and all races. Yeah. So like 3-year-old Zulu kids think it's great to be Zulu, which is fine. 3-year-old English kids think it's great to be English. 3-year-old Scottish kids think it's great to be Scots. 3-year-old French guys probably think it's good to be French, but I mean, you can't have everything. But it's it's I don't know. Marco Coletti's Brigade. Duke won't let you what?
Won't let him come on.
What do you want to say? Have you got an interesting point to make? If you've got an interesting point to make, I'll let you come on. But
He does usually have pretty good takes, but he's also a massive troll, so
yeah, exactly.
It's up to you.
Okay, no, troll in the chat, mate. Troll in the chat. I won't ban you in the chat, which is what happens like in a lot of channels. People get banned in the chat. I've been banned in chat quite often in different places. Sometimes for saying extremely innocuous things. Stenolch, gas. Yeah, exactly. I never had to puke, says Stenolch. He's talking about like when you're doing shit with gas in the military. No, I never had to puke. The only time I had to puke was 8 or 9 pints on a Saturday night on the way home. Sometimes I had to puke then, but yeah. Five Live, I'm not saying he has, but apparently he's a troll, and I believe it. Like many of us are trolls, but I'm not going to ban him out of the chat. He can say what he likes in the chat. People should know. People should know by now. I don't like large numbers of people on these streams. Like 4 is really my limit. I occasionally will have 5 people on, but that's not ideal to me. I think 4 is the most you should have on because people just interrupt each other all the time otherwise. I never puked during PT, Stanolch. Never did. But then I was quite fit back then. But yeah, like 8 pints I could usually manage. 9 pints was a push, even when I was like 19 or 20. And so sometimes I did puke on the way home from those things. Bill Bridges, you won't hear me slagging most people off on the Air 5 Live. I don't do it. You know, I know people who do streams about what Brutus has said in the past and all the rest of it. I barely mention such things. Don't care.
Yeah. So, I mean, with stuff like this training, how do you get rid of it? That's the $1 million question that we keep asking ourselves.
How do you get rid of what?
This stuff like this LinkedIn training that Coca-Cola and various other countries are putting
Oh,
companies are putting their staff
crikey.
through.
I don't know, man. I think it's extremely difficult. Like
Yeah.
we're not winning. Okay, like anyone on the right who thinks we're winning at the moment is a moron. Because we're not. We may or may not have a small majority of the people on our side, but most of those people are not willing to even speak up, let alone do anything. And understandably, in some respects, although really some of the guys have got a man up. I don't know. I like we need a sea change. When we talk about Alexander Boris Johnson, for example, and you look at the two potential prime ministers in the UK at the moment, Alexander Boris Johnson or Sir Keir Starmer, we're in the shit, mate. We're in the shit. We really are.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't argue we're not. Like no sane person can. As I said, the thing I'm going to keep pushing on this channel is vote for any more or less nationalist stroke populist party and push those parties into coming to some sort of loose alliance where they don't run against each other in the same seats. And that is the best I can come up with at the moment. So that we might at least end up at the next general election with a handful of MPs who might maybe start to be able to influence things a bit. Anne-Marie is not the new Churchill, but I don't think we need a new Churchill. I'm not a big Churchill fan, but not for the same reasons that adult fans don't like it. But yeah, so I don't know. That's the only thing I've come up with is you've got to stop voting Conservative for Labour, obviously. You've got to not vote Lib Dem and not vote for the fucking watermelon Greens. You've got to vote for the party that is most likely to win in your constituency, that is either nationalist stroke populist. And you need those parties to come up with some sort of loose alliance that they do not run against each other in the same constituencies. Because if they do, they'll get nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny one because you can't they're really perceptive. The institution is really perceptive to pushback if it's the pushback they want, even if they're supposedly on our side, and then they suddenly become like a tortoise defense instantly if they actually meet criticism that isn't pushing on the open door. So like you couldn't even start a large pushback against something like this LinkedIn training, because they would immediately just go, oh, some racists are trying to attack us, and we're going to ignore it and play it off as if they're suddenly the big brave corporation. So it is hard. I know. What's his name? The distributors talked about this, I think, a while ago. He said that like you have to make sure that every narrative you play isn't one they can spin into being the underdog. But it is so hard to do that. I kind of feel like you're checkmating yourself when you do that, because you're just cutting off all your possible routes to victory when you think about it like that. But I don't know. It's beyond what I can come up with solutions wise.
But the thing is, we are the underdogs at the moment. Like,
Yeah, but they thrive on pretending they are.
But we're the rebels. The real rebels are us on the right. The leftists are the mainstream now. They're the biased brainwashing corporation, and Alexander Boris Johnson's shitty government and Sir Keir Starmer's shitty opposition. That's all the left. Certainly
Yeah,
all
but they
the liberal left.
but they don't they thrive on believing that they're the underdog. I mean, it's the same as like if you look at like Extinction Rebellion and Antifa and all those sorts of rubbishy groups, BLM and all of those, they sate a certain desire because they allow people to do something that's generally very safe, but whilst pretending that they're actually a rebel or a revolutionary fighting against the system. It gives
Yeah.
them that narrative that people really want because generally people don't have much purpose nowadays anyway.
Yeah,
And
but
I suppose you can focus on that, just focus on breaking the idea that they are the underdog.
yeah, I mean, look, when Black Lives Matter pull down statues and toss them into the river, and they try to burn Union Jacks on what should be the most sacred war memorial in the UK, the Cenotaph in London. They just get away with it, and the cops run away from them if they do anything at all. Whereas as soon as anyone, even mildly right wing, tries to protect monuments or whatever else or protest against the forced lockdowns and all this kind of stuff, and the many thousands of businesses being forced out of business, people not able to earn a living and all this kind of stuff. As soon as any of those groups do anything, the cops come out with riot helmets and beat little old ladies up, so long as they're white little old ladies.
Yeah, yeah,
I
it's a
mean,
pretty
that's what we've got to point out.
yeah, that's a pretty sickening thing to see as well. I mean, I still like to vaguely be pro police because I do believe in the idea of a civilized society with a good
Yeah,
strong
but
police force.
they're just becoming so politicized these days, Am, and they're not upholding some sort of neutral law that allows for a civilized society. They're being used for political ends, and they're run by people who, the top cops who are political.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so this is the thing. Why is the army basically uncuckable to bring this round full circle, but the police really is.
I don't say that the army is uncuckable. I think it's much more cuckable now than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, but
Much,
it's always
much.
been yeah, but it's still always been much more resilient than other institutions.
Well,
Like it's
it's
probably the
about
most resilient institution we have.
yeah. Well, don't forget the army's about shooting people. At the end of the day, it's about killing the enemy.
Yeah,
And I think where the current globo homo social liberal establishment in the UK and also in the USA and probably in Australia as well will come mightily unstuck is if they rely on the armed forces to fire on their own people. I don't think they will. Because the people they must rely on to do that are the actual trigger pullers. They're the people we were talking about earlier in the T farms, particularly in the infantry and the Marines. And after that, the armor and the artillery and the engineers. And I honestly think that if Alexander Boris Johnson thinks that the British Army, for example, would open fire on real British people, I think he will come unstuck.
well, I mean the left's quite like there's this weird dichotomy that people bring up where they say like 1 minute people are pointing out that the left aren't very smart, but then the left's always winning. And I think a large part of that is that the left isn't very smart, but the left that we see now was built by people that were smart back in the day, people that are very old now or even dead, like Noam Chomsky and people like that. And but even though the left has also become quite dysgenic, uh, they still I think they're still smart enough to know that the moment they try and get the army to do their bidding is the moment they'll screw up. That's literally what's happened everywhere.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I just think that basically the ordinary soldiers and the NCOs and the junior officers, not the senior officers, but the junior officers, are still pretty good. And I think if you tell a British infantry company or a British Royal Marines company to open fire on real British people, I don't think most of them will. I think most of them will just say, no, I'm not doing it.
Well, I mean, this is essentially what happened everywhere, wasn't it? It's what happened in Chile. It's technically what happened in Iran as well, I think. It happened with like the whites in Russia too, but obviously they lost, which is I think what gives the left a lot of hope nowadays.
But the whole point of trying to pause the armed forces, like to make them more feminist and globo homo and all this bollocks, is that they can do that. But I think they're a long way off from actually succeeding in that.
Mm.
And they get away with it in the police because the police are still basically civilians, really. And whilst increasing numbers of them are armed in the UK, and people forget that the UK used to have basically an unarmed police force, but that was before the wonders of diversity. So, the reason we have an armed police force now is precisely because of diversity. But
Yeah, I
but they
think
but they don't fire very often, and they're mostly trained not to fire, really, except in very, very specific situations.
yeah, and I think that Thomas Sowell brought up that in like 1954, um, there was a double-digit level of gun crime in London, but in 1974, even though the population of the city had actually decreased in that time, um, they were up into like a four-digit number of gun crime in the city, 3 or 4 digits, something like that.
Yep, yep. I mean, the only time the UK has only relatively occasionally, prior to diversity, had a lot of gun crime, and one of the few times when it did was 1946, 1947, and that was blokes coming home from the army and the navy and the air force who had often been overseas for like 3 or 4 years and came back and found their wife had been or was carrying on with someone and blew her away. So that happened a bit. That was pretty based, I've got to say, in many respects. But not that I support violence, of course. But so that was one of the very few occasions in the UK that there was much gun violence prior to, like, diversity is so wonderful and multiculturalism is wonderful, and we all have these shitty kebab restaurants all over the place, So
Yeah, I mean, to a large extent, the gun stuff was like a canary in the coal mine to what was to come. Disarming the populace. I know that's like a cringe libertarian point that they're always reading out, but there is a lot of truth to it.
Yeah,
Um,
no, there is. I was talking about this to a guy the other day. Like in Australia, there was one nutcase in Tasmania who shot a load of people, and
yeah,
the Australian government used that as an excuse to basically ban all semi-automatic weapons in Australia. Like in Australia, you can quite easily get a bolt-action rifle like a Lee Enfield or something like that, but you can't get anything much above that. And in the UK, like when that idiot in Scotland shot all those kids and stuff, the UK government used that as a reason. It's like, oh, he was a nutcase. And the UK government
yeah,
used that as an excuse to ban all pistols in the UK, for example.
yeah, and you had Hungerford before that as well, where they used that to ban semi-autos.
Yeah, you always, and the same thing happens all the time. And I strongly suspect, Stan Alch in chat is saying Canada's already doing this, and I strongly suspect that Biden in America will try and do much the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is about I've actually done a really deep dive in the past into the Australian data, like a real deep dive, and because they always say that gun crime did decline afterwards, but then
Mm-hmm.
other people say, well, it had been declining already,
Yep.
so it didn't really matter. And all I found was that the decline in gun crime after the changes to firearms regulation in Australia increased by a rate of 2%, which is absolutely nothing. It's
Yeah.
so minuscule.
Yeah. Because it was
And
never very high in the first place.
no, no. And if you were to turn around to people who, let's say, had lost a loved one in a self-defense situation where maybe a concealed carry might have saved them, or in a home burglary,
Yeah.
um, people might say that 2% is almost like a slap in the face. And I know that here in the UK, we have literally about double the number of home burglaries that they do in America.
Yeah, for obvious reasons. If you can break into somebody's place, and he might blow your head off, yeah, that's likely to break in his place, really, aren't you?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like all of this stuff is nonsense because the overwhelming majority of gun crime is unlicensed gun crime.
Yeah.
But what they always go on about is legal guns. Criminals don't give a shit about legal guns,
No.
But if you want a gun in the UK, it's pretty easy, or it used to be even easier when UK was in the EU, to drive across to Belgium, buy one, and come back.
Yeah.
It's probably a bit more difficult since we left the EU, but probably not much more. Criminals don't use legal guns, unless they're morons. Criminals who are morons might use legal guns, but by and large they don't. It's just crap.
Yeah, and I mean, there's other problems as well, like if you look at I mean, like crime rates go up monstrously, and one of the things they often bring up, I've actually had someone say this to me. They go, "Oh well, all illegal guns started out as a legal gun," and the assumption that they're drawing from that is that it's a stolen gun, like it's a legal gun that someone owned that was stolen and then ended up in the hands of a criminal. And I've actually had people like legitimately. It was actually a low end, but still a politician, actually say to me that, well, most of the gun crime in the UK is done by guns that were just stolen from private gun owners. And I said you're literally just pulling that out of your ass. I said like a vast majority of guns used in criminal activity are pistols and machine guns, and yet no private citizens owned those for literally half a century now.
Yep, absolutely.
So that's just such utter bull. But and I think half the time they know that they're lying. They know that this is just all bullshit.
Look at all the ridiculous regulations and rules in UK about knife crime.
Yeah.
If you want to stab somebody, a screwdriver will kill someone quite happily.
Yeah.
Can you stop someone having a 10-inch screwdriver in the UK? Whatever laws you bring out, no, you can't.
No.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and like you end up with, there's a weird thing with that as well. You get these sort of cringe shops, right, where all that like the potheads go and they buy their bongs and all that sort of stuff there. And these places will often sell these like really crappy sort of fantasy or sort of movie replica knives and swords.
Yeah, terrifying.
And anywhere, any town where one of these exists, their local press will probably run a story at some point where they'll say, "Oh, you can buy these horrendous deadly weapons. Don't they realize it's the middle of a knife crime epidemic?" And the thing that no one's talking about is that none of these sorts of weapons are being used in knife crime. Like it's little kitchen knives.
Yeah, it's kitchen knives, it's screwdrivers, it's this kind of stuff. If you look at the British Army bayonet on the on the number 4 rifle in World War II, it's literally a screwdriver.
Yeah.
It's like a 7-inch screwdriver you stick on the end of the number 4 rifle, the Lee Enfield. And that was the British Army bayonet for most of World War II. It's entirely effective. If you stick 6 inches of screwdriver into someone's chest, or almost anywhere else in them, particularly if you do it more than once, you're probably going to kill them. You can't ban that shit, man. It's just ridiculous. And if you couldn't get those, you could get a sharpened stick and burn the end to make it a bit tougher, and you could stab someone with that. It's just, it's absolutely insane and crazy.
Yeah, and there's a lot of myths that are proliferated around the guns to that degree as well. Like they'll try and tell you that there's never been any gun culture in the UK, even though like my nan would often tell me that she'd go down to the post office and pick up like shotgun shells for her dad, and how everyone in their street owned a gun. And the Times had an actual one of my James Bond books actually. In the introduction, it talks about a guy who spoke to who was doing one of the James Bond movies, and his reference was he would go and talk to the Times shooting columnist. But if you try and look through previous columnists that worked for the Times, you can't even find any reference that they ever had a shooting column at all, even though they definitely did have one.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you'll have read Sherlock Holmes, yeah?
Yeah.
How many times does Sherlock Holmes or Dr. Johnson take his pistol out with him?
Oh, quite a lot, actually.
Yeah, and they were set at the end of the 19th century when there were basically no gun regulations in UK, and if you wanted to own a firearm, you could.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a picture. I don't know what I'd done with it, but I had this picture a while ago on my computer, and it was a guy walking to a gun range in London, walking through. I believe it's I forget where it is actually. It's a pretty prominent tourist area now, but back then it's just kind of a regular London area.
Yeah.
And it's all in black and white, and he's just walking down with his guns all out in the open to this gun range, and he walks past this cafe with all these people there, and no one's taken the blindest bit of notice.
Why should they? You know,
Yeah.
peaceful society, unarmed police force.
Yeah.
You know, there would be maybe a couple of revolvers in big police stations in big cities, and that was before, of course, multiculturalism, because multiculturalism has done our nation so much favors, like every other nation where it's come in.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the other problem as well. Like I was arguing with someone on Twitter a little while ago about having kids. Like, one of the points I made was, well, you should have kids because you need something to be to feel um, sort of invested in
Yeah.
society.
Yes.
But the thing is, I mean, we had a whole generation of people that had kids, and yet they were still willing to throw away their futures over appeasing immigrants.
But they
So
weren't. But they weren't. And this is my point: is I don't think they were. I think their views were ignored.
yeah, to a large extent, a lot of them were, yeah. But there
I
was
mean,
still a huge amount of them who had kids and still were still willing to throw it away.
well, there was some. I don't know. Look, listen. I'm not a boomer, although people think I am, but I'm not quite. But it's unfair to turn around and say that all those hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who supported Enoch Powell in the UK, for example, and they were all boomers or nearly all boomers or even pre-boomers, those guys were not willing to throw anything away, but the Conservative Party was.
Yeah.
This is the problem. Like, the Conservative Party rejected Ted Heath, and he rejected Enoch Powell, who was the youngest brigadier general in the British Army in World War II. An extremely intelligent bloke who was teaching Greek, ancient Greek, in Australian colleges in before the war. A really intelligent, sensible man. The Conservative Party rejected him, and they elected Ted Heath, who was 99.9% a pedophile.
Yeah.
As well as being an anti-British globalist, who took us into the then common market that eventually became the European Union. It's Conservative Party to blame, not the ordinary people. The ordinary people were damn right, and they supported Powell.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is my problem with conservative apologists, you know. Like, I considered myself a conservative for years. The only British Prime Minister I ever voted for, and obviously I didn't directly vote for her because that's not what we do in the UK, but I voted for Maggie twice. Because she was the only damn conservative who there's been, really. Certainly since Macmillan, and probably since before that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, this is kind of like what I mentioned earlier, and I still don't know how you fight it or how you expose it. But you know, the Conservative government will, on one hand, repeal Section 28, because it's popular, it's what the public wants us to do. If we don't, we might have like a big issue on our hands. But then, when literally 80% of the country comes out in support of an MP, they will, you know, essentially kick that MP out of the cabinet, work towards depersoning them, and eventually kick them out of polite society to the point that they have to exile themselves over to Northern Ireland.
Yeah, this is why we just cannot vote Conservative anymore. We just can't. Yeah, there are a handful of okay Conservative MPs, and if you're in that particular constituency, maybe vote for that guy. But it's a handful. I mean, that's maybe one of the things that we should do before the next general election is draw up a list of the very small number of really good Conservative MPs who are actually Conservative. And also then look at nationalist populist parties and who to vote for in particular constituencies. That might be something useful that maybe our little group could do before the next general election. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something's got to happen. You can't generally vote Conservative any more than you can generally vote Labour, because both of them are basically these days anti-British, and particularly anti-British Indigenous white people.
Yeah.
That's my honest view on that. Peter Hitchens was entirely correct. You've got to destroy the Conservative Party to get a real right-wing party in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, I kept thinking that maybe technology was the problem. That maybe I wasn't like a primitivist or anything. I wasn't going to go full Uncle Ted on anyone, but I did think to a large extent, or maybe with social media, maybe it's just a battle that can't be fought, because of the way sort of leftist subversion can move through society now. But at the same time, I mean, the Tories were just bending before any of this stuff came about, and
Yeah,
it never mattered then. So.
They're not even going left at the speed limit. They're kind of like putting their foot down a bit, particularly under Alexander Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
And like every hate speech law that comes out is basically designed to stop Indigenous white people saying anything about our BAME brothers and sisters,
Well, this is where, I mean, Hemi actually, right, on JDLE.
Yeah.
He used to say, well, we have to just stop fighting for the Tories as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, the thing was, I kept thinking, I know a lot of like high Tory guys, right, who I really get on with, and I do respect them in a lot of ways, and I like a lot of their takes and opinions. But they would say like, well, yeah, the Tories are shit. They would openly say that, but they also say, but they do at least give us some time.
But they don't now.
No, they don't buy us much time anymore. And
Yeah.
they also, the other thing as well is they seem to provide like a veneer of like, when people have voted for the Tories, they're like, well, I've done my part. I am trying to at least do something against this. And you've got to kind of wake people up to the fact that, no, you're doing nothing and you should stop doing the little bit that you think you are doing.
I would like to get somebody like, Delingpole. I'd like to get someone like Delingpole, who was a long time high Tory, who's now being cast into the wilderness because he's speaking the truth about the lockdowns and stuff. I'd like to get someone like Delingpole to say, look, this, I don't know, maybe 20 Conservative MPs are worth voting for because they're still actually Conservative. And so that we can actually get to a realistic situation of, if you are right of centre, who should you vote for? And I mean, if you're right of centre socially, not just in terms of economics, I'm talking about socially. In fact, I'm mainly talking about socially. I think that's what we've got to try and aim to do. So that, there is maybe a couple of handfuls, maybe not even that, of Conservative MPs who are worth voting for. I mean, at this stage, I don't even think Rees-Mogg's worth voting for anymore. Like, I used to be a big fan of Rees-Mogg, but he's been, generally speaking, one of the biggest letdowns for a long time now.
I'll be honest, I never liked him.
I used to.
Because I'm not the greatest judge of character, but I am quite happy that I called him.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I used to like Rees-Mogg, but not for a long time now. I just no. There are I can think off the top of my head of maybe a dozen Conservative MPs who are actually Conservative at most. There's
Yeah.
probably like 18 or 19 or something like that, but I don't think there are many more than that. And like I said, I think we need to get someone like Paul, who is a high Tory, or used to be anyway, and actually make a list. Like, these guys are worth voting for. Just, if the others, no, just don't vote for them. And then we need to get these nationalist and populist parties, and I really don't care which ones they are, to be honest. Like, they can be for Britain, they can be other ones. They can be Nigel Farage's lot even, although I'm increasingly like dubious about Farage, to be honest. You've then got those guys have got to come up with a loose alliance where they don't run against each other in the same seats. And then we can turn around and say to everyone who is socially conservative in the UK, look, vote for these guys. Because it won't be perfect, but it will change things.
Yeah, I don't even think you need to worry about them taking each other's seats, because all you need to do is get them to take the main party's votes.
You do. But the trouble is, like, if you've got, say, Anne-Marie Waters for Britain and Farage's party running against each other, they will split that vote. And in some places that might let Labour in, and in other places it will let the Conservatives stay in. Do you see my point?
Yeah.
And that's what I think we've got to avoid. We've got to get to a situation whereas there is one right-wing party, and like I said, in maybe like a dozen or a dozen and a half places, it might actually be a Conservative, but in other places, it should be the nationalist / populist party that has the most chance of winning that seat. And I don't even really care if I totally agree with them on the details of their policies. I just want the Conservatives and Labour gone.
Yeah.
Now, if we can do that, we might be able to start to change things a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
like as Five Liver is saying in the chat, I think for Britain, because of Anne-Marie Waters, has a good chance of winning quite a lot of Labour seats, because there are many respects that she is quite left-wing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas Farage's party probably has more chance of being Conservatives. And I think if they could just come to some fucking basic agreement that at the next general election, that's what they'll do. Like, in Labour seats, they'll let For Britain run. In other seats, they'll let Farage's party run, or even UKIP. I don't care. We just need to stop. We need to get rid of as many Conservative and Labour MPs as possible. That's the one possible chance we have.
Yeah, I mean, I'm full barrage pilled at this point. And there's a lot of policies actually that Farage has put now that he's changed it to the Reform Party that I don't like democratising the House of Lords and stuff like that. But
totally agree.
Stuff that he said on drugs as well. But you know, the thing to do there is to actually get involved in the machine. I know that sounds cringe, because that's like what everyone always says, get involved in politics. But when it comes to small parties, yeah, you can absolutely make a difference. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, and also, like I said, I don't think it's cringe, but I also don't think it matters. I think, like, let's get rid. If we don't get rid of the Conservatives and Labour, UK's finished, and it's finished sooner rather than later.
Yeah,
and I absolutely agree with you. There are many things that Farage comes out with which I don't agree with at all. But I'd sooner have Farage MPs in the House of Commons than Conservatives. Except for that small handful of actual real Conservatives, which I keep talking about. Because I don't want to ditch those guys. You know, I'd like those 18, 19, 20 Conservative MPs to get re-elected, because they're actually Conservative.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of them need to go. And the same with Labour. And that's the only chance we've got of changing things electorally. And I know there's all these accelerationists and people who are looking for a race war and all sorts of other bullshit who don't agree with that. But I still think our only real chance is to change things like an election. And the only way we can do that is we've got to get rid of most Conservative and Labour MPs.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if there's going to be any coalition of conservatives that are going to come forward and take over any momentum that you can build through sort of revolt through small parties, it's going to be from the backbenchers.
Yeah,
Anyone that's sort of at the front now, they need to go because they're
yeah,
they're not our
yeah,
people.
absolutely. And the Conservative MPs I'm talking about are backbenchers for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they're not in the cabinet.
Mm.
And like Five Alive was saying in the chat, for Britain can target winnable Labour seats, and Farage can take on Tory seats, and there are other seats that maybe UKIP can take on. I know I would support any of those parties. I don't care so long as we reduce the number of Conservative and Labour MPs and get some actual British, more or less nationalists into Parliament. It's the only way we can do anything.
Yeah, I mean, in Belgium, they've got to the point now where even the left-wing parties are anti-immigration. So,
Well, yeah,
I mean, it can
good.
be done.
Yeah, absolutely, and there have been in the past, and certainly in the Labour Party just post World War II, there were a lot of Labour MPs who were anti-immigration. They didn't last long though, at least speaking openly.
Yeah. Mm.
You know, unions used to be absolutely anti-immigration because obviously mass third-world immigration inevitably forces down wages at the same time as it inevitably forces up housing costs.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to be a fucking brain of Britain to work that out.
Well, I mean, there's another thing is that because I've always been quite anti-union, and I actually kind of thought that maybe we should have a return of guilds, which is probably a bit too neo-feudalism larpy. But um, the thing is, to me, right, because I'm kind of young anyway,
Mm.
and oh, hang on, no, sorry, just my cat's causing pain. So to me, unions have always been like a vehicle for socialism.
Mm.
But they don't seem to be that if you were to go to many other countries.
No.
So I
If,
don't understand why they are that way now.
well, they never used to be, Alan. This is the point. I mean, if you look at Australian labour unions in the 1960s, they were fully behind the White Australia policy.
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be a thing where, like to me, to my mind, it seems to be it was sometime before Enoch Powell, before the infamous Enoch Powell speech, that
Mm.
that they started becoming because I did an Enoch Powell video and I had a quick look through some of the stuff about like the people that came out in support of him. And even then, there were like these union guys that were saying that, oh, these people have been hoodwinked into capital and imperialism and blah blah blah, and
But they
we're the
were,
real workers, people. Even though they're walking around, the union people had these really nicely done wooden signs,
mm.
and the Enoch Powell people just had bits of cardboard with his name scribbled on it.
Yeah, and I bet you any money you like that those union people who were saying that were the union leaders and not the actual ordinary members. Because the
Yeah.
ordinary union members in UK, and I vaguely remember this as a very small child, well, and my dad talking about it as well, because my dad was an Enoch Powell supporter. Um, these ordinary working class guys and union members, like from Billingsgate, the fish market, and all the big things that used to be in London, they were 100% behind Powell,
Yeah.
or 99% anyway. You know, these guys were the original, in inverted commas, gammon that these vile middle class shitbags who try and slag off the working class talk about these days.
Mm.
You know, they were just gammon because, you know, it's the gammon who actually have to deal with all this multiculturalism and
Yeah.
their communities being destroyed. I mean, look at it this way: London, the Londoners. There are no Londoners hardly left. I mean,
Yeah.
there's some in Essex and places like that, and there's guys like me on the other side of the world. But most real Londoners don't live in London anymore. That's
Mm.
why London is a white minority city now.
Yeah.
I just think it's like, I remember as a kid, I grew up in Bermondsey, which was, it's like in the middle of London. It's basically on the south side of Tower Bridge, yeah? It's Southwark
Yeah.
is the actual borough, but like Bermondsey is a dockland area, or used to be a dockland area, and all that kind of stuff. And when I lived there in the 1970s, late 1970s, as a child, it was rough as guts. But if you were a kid or a woman, you could walk around at like 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, and you were very, very unlikely to have anything nasty happen to you. Like you, as a kid or a woman, there could be a fight in the street, and no one was going to get involved with you, because like basically women and kids were off limits.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, okay, there was a bit of domestic violence, of course there was. That always happens everywhere with all races of people. But even that wasn't huge. Basically, like my old man used to hit me on the back of the head pretty hard if I swore in front of a woman when I was about 15 years old. Like any woman, she could be a damn prostitute, and if I swore in front of her, my old man would hit me on the back of the head and say, "No, you don't do that, mate."
My grandfather was pretty much the same. So yeah.
Yeah, it was like it was an okay place, If you were a little kid and got lost, I mean, I remember once I got lost when I was about 6 or 7 years old, middle of nowhere, I'd gone out on my own when I wasn't supposed to, like I had all these women and blokes and all the rest of it making sure I got home all right. I got given bus fare and all sorts of things. There was community. There was they were basically good people, These were the guys who went through the Blitz and all this stuff, and put open as usual signs on their businesses, even though there was a bus sticking next door upside down. They were good people, and they were destroyed by Globo Homo.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
It could make, if I was an emotional type, which I'm not, it would make me fucking cry. It's just so damn sad. And the same thing that is happening all over England and all over Britain. Like good people being destroyed and their communities being destroyed and broken up, and the sense of their own history that made British people themselves, I tell you what, I just watched a movie like the other day called The Dig. Have you seen it?
No.
All right, you should watch it. Like, I don't like many modern films at all. I really don't. And I certainly don't like many modern Netflix films. And I didn't watch this on Netflix, by the way. I pulled up the Jolly Roger to watch it. This is a film called The Dig, and it's based on the true story of the Southern Who dig in Suffolk in England just before World War II, where they found all this wonderful Dark Ages treasure from the Anglo-Saxons, And this was a very rich woman, a widow, but she was sick. Like she had a disease that was going to kill her. And she was a rich widow of a young son. And she engages this very skilled, but not academically qualified, working class archaeologist bloke to dig on these big mounds on her property in Suffolk at Sutton Hoo. And he digs up probably the greatest Anglo-Saxon treasure that's ever been found in the UK. And as he's doing this just as World War II is ramping up. Like Britain this is one of the things these nasty LARPer bastards don't get. Britain did not want to fight World War II at all. Far too many people had lost fathers and brothers and sons in World War One. They knew what it was going to be like. They didn't want to do it again. But Adolf Hitler and his Nazi mates actually absolutely forced Britain into doing this. And so the background of this movie is the beautiful English countryside around Suffolk, and these very, very pretty English villages, and like the British people, who, like the real British people, are these very polite. And obviously, I'm talking to you. You know this. You're British, same as I am. They're these generally very polite guys who are kind to kids and women mostly, and are a little bit distant. We don't tend to hug each other and this kind of stuff. We shake hands and and all this kind of stuff, which is stiff upper lip, typically British stuff. But basically, a very quietly brave people. And The Dig is a great film. I'd recommend it. You should watch it. It's really good.
Yeah, I'll have to keep an eye out for it.
Yeah, no, like I said, hoist the Jolly Roger and go on one of these kind of sites. It's a really good film. It's excellent. And it kind of sums up, like, when I was a kid, British people were still those people. That where I lived, they had Cockney accents, but you could have gone to Cornwall and they'd have had Cornish accents, or you could have gone to Kent and they'd have had a Kentish accent, or up to the north of England, or in Scotland, or Wales, or wherever. And they were basically those people. And those are the real British people that, like, I always talk about when we're on these streams.
Mm.
No, they're just like, I don't know. I would not have been born to any other nation but England and Britain. Couldn't imagine being any other nation. Like, I live in Australia and I love Australians. And as far as I'm concerned, Australians are like our first cousins,
Yeah.
And the same with Canadians, New Zealanders, and many South Africans as well, to be true. So yeah, it's like, I don't know, man. Our people are being destroyed, but they're not being destroyed by our people. Our people have always been basically sound. If you look back to Powell, most of the ordinary people didn't want that immigration.
Yeah.
And they never have. The one thing I will give to PA, the one thing that Laura Towler did, was that we were never asked thing, which is damn true.
Yeah, they need to do more of that. They should have been doing that sort of like much more regularly and
Oh, well,
in lots more places.
Yeah, but these days Mark Collette prefers playing games on YouTube, so
Yeah.
whatever. But that wasn't him anyway. That was Laura Towler. But that was the one good thing they did. But that we were never asked, because it's true. The ordinary British public have always been against mass border immigration. And both parties, Labour and Conservative, have just ignored them.
Mm. So are we going to leave it there? We actually went on longer than...
Yeah, we did go. Yeah, well, we got on to another subject. Yeah, I'm going to play us out with a tune, as I always do, which is, I hope, appropriate. So we'll do that. Thank you for coming on, Outman.
Yeah,
I'm sorry that Grief didn't manage to come on, but obviously maybe he got home late or something. So there we go. Okay, ladies and gents, have a good evening, have a good day, wherever you are. And we'll see you again next Saturday, if not before.